It was barely 3 p.m. on a Friday, and I was already 2 shots of Jack Daniels deep into what was shaping up to be an epically bad weekend. As a reporter for a small newspaper in the Midwest, I had been working several late nights in a row. My boss, noticing my exhaustion, had given me the afternoon off as comp time. After running a few errands, I headed home, looking forward to a good nap in my favorite lazy boy. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed 2 cars. One belonged to my wife of 7 years, Tracy, and the other was unfamiliar. It was odd that Tracy was home in the middle of the day. She worked as an actuary for a mid-sized insurance company and usually kept an 8-to-5 schedule. And then there was the second vehicle. Despite this unusual situation, I trusted Tracy completely. We had an amazing marriage, so I didn't jump to any conclusions as I unlocked the front door. But my world quickly fell apart. From upstairs, I heard the unmistakable sounds of 2 people passionately engaged in an affair. The door was open, and I could hear moaning, yelling, and flesh slapping. I took the carpeted stairs 2 at a time, and the sounds became clearer. "This what you want? This what that little dick twit of a husband not giving you," some guy's voice railed. My wife was groaning louder, clearly in the throes of passion. When I reached the bedroom door, I saw my gorgeous wife on her back beneath a man who looked like a linebacker for the Packers, giving her a tremendous pounding. Her legs were wrapped around his lower back. "Give it to me. Derek! Give it to me," she cried out. From what I could see, he was well endowed, probably 9 or 10 inches, much larger than my solidly average 6 inches. Tracy had never indicated dissatisfaction before, but her current reactions told a different story. I felt nauseous as my world crumbled before my eyes. "Playing through. Don't mind me," I yelled as I walked into the room, opened my closet, and started packing a gym bag with a couple of changes of clothes. Derek barely broke stride until Tracy realized I was there and stopped. "Oh, shit. Simon, I'm so sorry you had to see this," she yelled. "We were going to tell you, not have you find out like this." "Exactly when would that have been then, Trace?" I responded. "On our 10th anniversary? From the looks of things, this is hardly a one-off. Surely you could have found the time to tell me before this if you really cared." Although Derek had stopped pumping my wife, he was still embedded inside her, and she was trying to look around him as we spoke. "Never mind, Tracy. I'll just grab a few things and be out of your hair. I'll come by for whatever else I want and need in the coming days. I'll have my lawyer draw up papers. By the way, who the fuck is this Neanderthal plugging you?" "That's kind of funny," she giggled. "Derek is my attorney. He works for one of the big firms downtown." "Perfect," I said. I didn't bother to even close the front door when I left the house. I put my stuff in my Ford F-150 and headed straight for my favorite watering hole. Not exactly an auspicious start to the weekend. Most bars are pretty empty on a weekday afternoon, and the Rusty Fork was no exception. Even my favorite bartender, Noel, didn't begin his shift until 4. So I just sat in my spot thinking, I suppose I should have seen this coming. The last time we went out to one of my wife's work events, her coworkers barely disguised their disdain for me, and I felt toward the end of the evening that she was starting to agree with their assessment of my job and my ability to support her in the style to which she'd like to become accustomed. Tracy made no qualms about talking about how her job paid twice as much as mine. We had a terse discussion about her behavior on the ride home that night, and she blamed it on being somewhat tipsy. I wasn't happy with that explanation, but as someone who doesn't hold grudges, we were okay a few days later, or at least I thought we were. So here I sit at the bar. I know I should probably be out making sure to move half of our money over to an account in my name only, but right now I could give a shit. My credit card is in my name only, which means I can spend the rest of the night getting shit-faced before sleeping it off in my truck. I'll find a hotel or an apartment to rent tomorrow. Tracy and I met at a major Midwestern university. We dated for our junior and senior years before I asked her to marry me. We knew that unless I could get on at a major newspaper in a major city, she was probably always going to out-earn me, but we both agreed that everything we made was ours, not that there would be a hers and mine. And that's what I thought we had until recently. I don't know how much of her attitude is because of her coworkers, but apparently she has lost her respect for me completely, and as for her love, well, today showed me exactly where I stood. Noel greeted me when he came on at 4 p.m., mildly surprised at how early I was there. I gave him the condensed version of my afternoon and handed him my pickup keys, instructing him to pour me into the cab when I was done and not to give me the keys back until I woke up the next day. "That's harsh, dude, finding out that way," he said as we talked. By about 9 p.m., I was numb, feeling no pain, when a state trooper showed up at the bar. He ambled over to Noel and asked if a Mr. Simon Tillerson was there. Noel pointed him in my direction. The trooper then ambled over to me. He was very good at this ambling thing, I noted in my fogged brain, and said he had some regrettable news. My wife and a Mr. Derek Biggs had been killed about 3 hours earlier when a semi ran a light and plowed over Biggs' BMW convertible. Authorities had been trying to locate me for hours before one of my acquaintances mentioned my favorite bar. "Fuck me!" I yelled. "Drinks are on me. There's a God in heaven." A cheer went up at my announcement. Trooper Reginald Masters looked like he'd seen a ghost. He probably wasn't expecting glee from a new widower. "Mr. Tillerson, I get that you must be in shock, but—" "Not shock, buddy, ecstasy," I wailed in my drunken state. "I'm so fucked up because I caught the two of them screwing in my bed this afternoon. I was going to leave her. This couldn't get any better." The trooper still looked appalled. I couldn't care less. Normally we like for the next of kin to identify the body, just to be completely sure it's the right person, but I don't think Mr. Tillerson will be of any help tonight, Masters said to Noel. "Could you make sure someone leaves him the message to go to the morgue tomorrow?" Noel nodded affirmatively. I may have been drunk as a skunk, but I understood what was going on and what Masters had told me. Even though I knew I would miss my wife when I sobered up, at that moment my anger at Tracy for cheating and planning to replace me overshadowed any love I still had for her. I woke up stiff and sore in the cab of my pickup the next morning. I probably looked like hell, but I staggered back into the bar to pick up my keys and then drove to a hotel. On the way, I remembered what the trooper had told me the previous night, so I decided to head home to my empty house instead. As I drove, I thought about Tracy and the 9 years we had shared, 7 of them as husband and wife. I felt more sad than anything about how things had ended between us. I can't say I was grieving, because even though I was no longer drunk, I still felt that she and the jerk had gotten what they deserved. Once home, I jumped in the shower, cleaned up, and headed over to the morgue to identify the body. Tracy's body looked battered, which I guess is what happens when a semi drives over the top of you in a convertible. I asked to see the other body as well. Derek looked similarly battered. I hoped his death was slower to come. When I got back home, I knew I had to make at least 3 phone calls, one to my parents, one to her parents, and one to her sister, Anya. Deep down, I was sorry to see her die, but every thought of her came with the image of her urging Derek to give it to her. I couldn't muster any sorrow in my heart for her. So I decided I would do my job, report the facts, and keep my lack of emotion out of the equation if I could. I did feel bad for Ron and Cindy Jacobs, Tracy's parents. I loved them almost as much as my own parents, and I certainly didn't want to see them hurt. From that perspective, this was not going to be easy. I called my parents first and gave them the news. My mom, the more emotional of the two, burst into tears immediately. My father, on the extension, started asking for more specifics. So I told him about Tracy being in the car with Derek Biggs at the time of the accident. "Who's Derek Biggs?" he asked directly. I knew the question was coming, but I hesitated before answering, which probably told him volumes. "An attorney friend of Tracy's," I answered. "My father is very smart and perceptive. He didn't miss a beat." "So why was she in the car with an attorney friend of hers at a time when she should have been home with you?" "Because she wasn't with me anymore, Dad, that's why. I caught her and Derek having sex in our bed earlier in the day, and I'm guessing it wasn't their first rodeo together. So I threw some clothes in a bag and left. I don't know why they were in the car around 6. I'm assuming they were going out to eat, considering the time." "Well, shit, son, I'm sorry to hear that." By this point, my mother had composed herself and got back on the line. She had heard enough to understand the situation. Are you sure she was having sex with another man, Simon? This isn't something you want to tell people unless you're absolutely sure. I interrupted, not very diplomatically. Mom, I caught them in the act. I've had sex enough times to know what I was looking at. Have you talked to Ron and Cindy yet, Simon? If not, what are you going to tell them? My dad asked. As little as possible, Dad, unless they start grilling me like you are. I won't lie, if that's what you're asking. This could get ugly, then, son. Remember, they are your in-laws. Show them the respect they deserve. Yes, sir, I responded solemnly. The call to Tracy's parents went eerily similar to the one I had with mine. While her mother fell to pieces, my father-in-law immediately picked up on the fact that she was in the car with another man at the time of her death when she should have been with me. Is there something you're not telling us, Simon? Ron asked as Cindy bawled in the background. At 6 on a Friday night, Tracy should have been with her husband, but she was in a car with another man. This equation's not adding up, son. All right. All right. I half yelled, half croaked into the phone. Tracy was cheating on me. I caught her in bed hours earlier with the guy she died with. I gathered some things and left. I guess they figured they had nothing to hide anymore and were going out somewhere together. You caught them together? In bed? In your house? Ron sounded incredulous. He struggled to believe that his daughter, who had just been pronounced dead, was also cheating on her husband and died with her lover. Yes, Ron, yes. And right now, I'm so mad at her I'm actually happy the two of them died. The bitch and her lover got what they deserved. I knew I shouldn't have said that last part to her father, no matter how true it was. He started to yell at me on the phone until I interjected quietly but forcefully. He was ridiculing me, Ron, while he was screwing your daughter, and she was going along with it. She demanded he give her his big dick. Yes, your daughter, and my wife. This saves me the trouble of divorcing her. She won't be buried in my family's plots, and I most certainly won't want to be by her side when my time comes. So just tell me the name of the funeral home your family uses, and I'll make sure the body is taken there. I'll handle all of that and the financial side. You and Cindy work out the rest, like the viewing. Obviously, I won't be there. You can't just pretend she didn't matter in your life, son, Ron said in his best calming voice. You two were together for almost a decade. You can't tell me all that can be erased. It can and it has, Ron, I responded. We were done the minute I saw her with Derek Biggs in our bedroom. Why should her death change the way I feel? Surely someday, with some time, you'll feel differently about this and wish you had said a proper goodbye, Ron said, almost in a whisper. Don't think so, I said just as quietly. The funeral service was held at Ron and Cindy's home church, the same church where Tracy and I had made our vows before God and our families to love, honor, and cherish each other. The irony wasn't lost on me. I briefly considered attending, but the thought made my anger well up inside me. Have you ever wanted to choke the shit out of a dead person? That's where I was. Attending the funeral might have comforted Tracy's parents, but it would have only fueled my anger, and I had more than enough of that. About an hour after I figured the service would be over, I got a call from Tracy's sister, Anya. I knew this wasn't going to be pleasant, but she probably needed to vent, especially if her parents hadn't told her the complete story. Tracy was right. You are a piece of shit. You're a small man, with small dreams, and you have a small dick. You write small stories for a small newspaper and have a small future. I always wondered what took her so long to start cheating on you. Well, pleasant day to you too, Anya, I replied. So, I'm guessing you knew all along. So then why, if I was such a bad guy, would you have even wanted me there? Because you embarrassed my parents, you piece of shit. How can you even answer the question as to why Tracy's husband wasn't at the funeral? My parents practically died of embarrassment when they had to tell the Reverend why you weren't coming. You are a piece of shit and I hope you die, too. Now you're catching on, Anya. I yelled into the phone. That's exactly what I thought about your sister and her lover after I caught them, and you know what? I got lucky. They did die. So now why don't you just fuck off and leave me alone? I thought that went well. I got a realtor and put the house up for sale immediately. I moved my stuff into the spare bedroom and sold off all our bedroom furniture, including the sheets and pillowcases, for dirt cheap. I was never going to touch any of that stuff again. As for the rest of Tracy's belongings, I took her jewelry, most of which I had given her, sold it to a local jeweler, and donated the money to a church food pantry. I boxed up her clothes and everything else and took them to her parents, telling them they could keep or dispose of the items at their leisure. Those boxes included our wedding album and the usual small photos you normally have of each other. I had enough photos of Tracy in my head, with the very last one of her and Derek Biggs in our marital bed, that I would never be able to forget. Ron and I made small talk as he helped me unload my pickup. When the last box had been unloaded, I looked at Ron and Cindy, and they looked back at me. We moved in for a tight family hug. I'm pretty sure we were all crying. "See you guys," I whispered as my voice failed me. All of this was done in the first 2 weeks after Tracy's death. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I got a phone call from Cruz Miller Insurance. Tracy and I always had life insurance, so I knew why they were calling. It just wasn't a priority in my life until I got everything squared away. With everything on the obvious side now done, it was time to return their call. Tracy, being the insurance professional, had handled all our insurance purchases. We always discussed everything, but since that was her field of expertise, I let her make the final decisions. One of those decisions was a $1 million life policy on each of us, with a double indemnity clause for accidental death before age 45. That meant a $2 million payout was coming my way. But then the insurance agent said something else that almost made me choke on my coffee. Since the truck driver caused the accident, his company would be liable for a wrongful death payout unless I wanted to go to court and sue them for more. They would pay for both Tracy and Derek. The agent advised me to accept nothing less than another $2 million, though she figured $3 million to $4 million was more appropriate. After the lawyer took his cut, I could have about $5 million in the bank. I ended up with $4.75 million after the lawyer's cut. At that point, I was completely numb. The trucking company settled with Derek Biggs' widow as well, and we would assign the papers at the same time and place. I had never met his widow until the signing. While I thought Tracy was beautiful, Derek's widow was at least as beautiful, making me wonder why he would risk his marriage for an affair. Maybe he was so sure he wouldn't get caught that he didn't see any risk. After signing the paperwork, Ellie Biggs invited me for a cup of coffee. She had one unanswered question and hoped I could provide the answer. My husband didn't have a friend named Tracy Tillerson that I knew of, and his firm told me she wasn't a client. Yet they were in the car together when they died. Nobody in Derek's office knows who this woman is, or if they do, they're not telling me. What was your wife to my husband, Mr. Tillerson? I took a big gulp of coffee. Damn. I hated to be the bearer of more bad news to this extremely good-looking woman. I dropped my eyes to the table in the Starbucks where we were. "Oh, that bad," she said on cue. "Please, Mr. Tillerson. I deserve to know the truth." So I told her the whole story from my side. She looked appalled. I suddenly felt sick to my stomach. "Thank you for your honesty," she said as she got up from the table and left the coffee shop. Although I was now wealthy by most people's standards, my life sucked. I had no desire to date. I moved into a shabby one-bedroom apartment just to have a roof over my head. I had few friends and didn't really care. I worked at the newspaper, rode my bike a lot, and lifted weights several times a week. I just existed. My father, bless his soul, finally convinced me to see a therapist. His diagnosis, trust issues. He encouraged me to get out in public more and try to have a semblance of a life. That was a waste of an hour. I never made another appointment. So, I'm sitting in my place, watching baseball and replaying the conversation with Anya that happened after Tracy's funeral 6 months earlier. She said I wrote small stories for a small newspaper, and she was right. I had taken the job because it was the only newspaper opening near Tracy's job, and since she made more money than me, I sacrificed my plans of moving to a larger paper until Tracy decided we should move. But now I wasn't tied to the community. In fact, I probably didn't ever have to work another day in my life. I was free to come and go as I pleased, and write whatever I wanted, without caring if anyone ever read it. The next day, I gave my boss, Ernie, my 2 weeks' notice. Sitting in my apartment that night, I looked at my library, which was a collection of about 30 books, 28 of them nonfiction. One of the 2 fiction books was Moby Dick by Herman Melville. That got me thinking, which some say is dangerous for me. One of my academic strengths in school, according to all those crazy tests, was abstract thinking. Before the days of hyperlinks on the internet, I used to do that all the time in my mind, take a thought, mull it over, twist it around slightly, and go in yet another direction. It worked for me, but it didn't make it easy for my friends to follow my thinking when we got into deep discussions about things. They learned never to ask what if when I was around. 10 minutes later, it occurred to me that Tracy was always going to be my white whale, and I had to hunt her. But I would do it with the written word. That's how it started. I sat down at the computer and composed my first fiction story since 8th grade. The Derek Biggs character was killed off, and the Tracy character got severely punished by life. It took me 2 full days to write it, edit it, and polish it, but for the first time in half a year, I felt energized. I still couldn't punish Tracy in real life, but I could in my head in this story. I went on to write 17 more short stories over the next 2 months, changing things up but keeping a couple of constants. The Derek character always was killed off, and the Tracy character always got her comeuppance. It felt damn good when I would complete one, set it aside, and then read the finished product. Then I happened upon Moby Dick. It was an actual book, with a cover and bound pages. I can do that, I thought to myself. Yes, I could, and I did. 6 months later, I had my first novel, a historical romance, of all things. Of course, the Derek character met a vicious end, and the Tracy character was humbled once again. I thought it was pretty good, and apparently, a publisher did too. The deal wasn't great, but at least I didn't have to pay to have it self-published. Somehow, the book gained traction, and people liked it. The publishing company did 2 more runs. They wanted a second book and doubled the money, so I wrote another. This one was a murder mystery, and, as expected, the Derek character was the victim, and the Tracy character got caught and jailed. I felt much better after completing the book, and the strong sales didn't hurt either. It felt like a lot of people were agreeing with my feelings about Tracy and Derek. After the success of the second book, a second publishing company approached me with a 3-book deal at double the money. Although I didn't need the money, being already wealthy in secret, I gave the first company the right of first refusal. They quickly agreed, so I stayed with them and delivered 3 more books over the next 18 months. Each book followed the same basic storyline, but I changed the scenarios and even tried some humor in the third one. All 3 were hits, but more importantly, I felt better about myself with each completed book. I knew I would never get answers to my questions about what Tracy did and why she did it, so this was as close to satisfaction as I could get. Like the old song says, love the one you're with. I signed another 3-book deal with my publisher, with my price doubling again. This time, they had bigger news. One of the movie studios wanted to adapt at least 2 of the books into feature films, offering a substantial sum and even wanting my help with the screenplay. I agreed. While I had never been a big fan of Oprah Winfrey, her endorsement of a book usually catapulted the author to immense success. When she chose my 6th book as one of her books of the month, I experienced that firsthand. It was amazing. Not only was I a successful author, but I was also being recognized in public. There were downsides, but that's the price of success. Most people were polite and nice, but occasionally a jerk would try to prove they weren't impressed by me. That's okay because I'm not impressed with me either, but I don't need to take shit from anybody. I can do rude as well as anyone. So, I was sitting in my favorite bar, the same one where the state trooper had told me Tracy was dead, just enjoying a Friday evening with my good buddy Jack Daniels. Now worth over $10 million, I still enjoyed the simpler things in life, a good drink, working out, riding my road bike, and occasionally hooking up with a good-looking woman. I still lived in the same crappy apartment and hadn't been searching for lasting female companionship. I think a few of the regulars at the bar knew about my writing success, but for the most part, everyone left me alone. Some playful ribbing now and then, but nobody really talked about reading my stuff. Of course, I figured about half of them couldn't read anyway, so that took them off my potential fan club list. Noel, my favorite bartender, knew about my success, and we would occasionally talk about it or something I was working on. He was a good dude and apparently kept his mouth shut about me. Of course, the fact that I tipped him $20 every time I was there probably helped. I was watching the TV screen closest to me, listening to the background music, and in general not paying much attention to life when two women suddenly appeared alongside me at the bar. They were both attractive, probably in their mid-30s like me, dressed in jeans and regular tops. They weren't trying to impress anybody, but there was something familiar about the one farthest from me. I knew why as soon as she started talking to me. "You don't remember me, do you, Mr. Tillerson?" she asked as her friend leaned back on her stool so we had a clear line of sight. Truthfully, I didn't at first, but then it clicked. I was looking at Ellie Biggs, Derek Biggs' widow. I had only met her once, at the settlement signing when the trucking company paid us for killing our cheating spouses, and at that time, I confirmed for her that, yes, her shithead husband was cheating on her with my wife. "I most certainly do remember you, Mrs. Biggs." It took me a minute, though. "How have you been?" "You certainly look great, if you don't mind me saying so." Ellie blushed and looked at her friend. Then she looked me straight in the eyes. "I am much better than the last time you saw me, and honestly, I have you to thank for that, at least from an emotional standpoint. You see, Derek's death left me about $2 million richer, but I was a total mess when he was killed. And then, on top of that, I found out he was cheating on me. I was both sad and angry, particularly angry that I would never get to tell that cheating prick what I thought about him. So one day, Rachel here brought me your first book. She saw your name on the cover and remembered it from our meeting. At first, I started skimming it, realizing you were writing about our worthless spouses, and you just kept drawing me in. When Derek's character was killed off, I can't describe the feeling of relief I had. Then when Tracy got hers, I felt vindicated, for lack of a better word. That was the best I had felt since that horrible day. Since then, I've read every single book you've written. This may sound stupid, but they make me feel better about myself. And I usually giggle like a schoolgirl when Derek and Tracy get theirs. That's kind of how I feel when I finish writing one, I related. I'm glad I could help you as well. Considering how well they've sold, I'm guessing there must be a lot of people who can relate to what we've been through. I honestly never considered writing for a career. Hell, I hadn't written fiction since 8th grade. And maybe since I really didn't have to write, since I had my settlement money and a lot of insurance money, maybe that helped things flow out of me. I guess I'll do it as long as it feels good. The three of us moved over to a table, and I bought a couple of snack trays for us to munch on. We talked until midnight, when the ladies said they needed to get going. I told them I honestly couldn't remember having a nicer night in quite some time and asked if we could do it again in the future. How about next Friday night, but we start off with a real dinner first, on me? I asked. They both accepted. The following Friday night, I met them at my favorite Italian restaurant, and we had another enjoyable evening. Both women were attractive. Ellie had long blonde hair and blue eyes, with a curvaceous figure, while Rachel had long black hair and a more athletic build. Ellie wore a lower-cut blouse that nicely showed off her assets, while Rachel sported a short, clingy skirt that highlighted her figure. Truthfully, I felt slightly awkward having the two best-looking women at my table. Okay, that was a lie. I absolutely loved having the two best-looking women in the restaurant sitting with me. We enjoyed an excellent meal and good conversation, but as the restaurant was packed, I suggested we move to a nearby club for an after-dinner drink. Rachel decided to head home at that point, and I agreed to drive Ellie back. Stella's bar was only half full, making it easy for Ellie and me to converse. The first thing I asked her was if she or Rachel had won. Did the winner get me, or was it the loser? Apparently, she didn't give me enough credit for understanding the female mind, because she blushed a deep red. I was the winner, I hope, she stammered quietly. Actually, I think I'm the winner. But truth be told, I felt like the winner the moment you both sat down with me. I think every guy in the restaurant wanted to beat the crap out of me for hogging the prettiest two women, I said with a chuckle. Ellie blushed deeply again. Can I tell you something, and you promise you won't get mad at me? She looked at me seriously, scrunching up her nose. I nodded cautiously, unsure where this was heading. I absolutely hated your guts when I left the lawyer's office after we signed the settlement papers. I knew you had nothing to do with Derek cheating on me with Tracy, but in my mind, the fact that you knew and I didn't put you one up on me. I didn't take it well with everything else going down. I felt like you were holding out on me as well. I got that vibe, and I totally understood it. Besides, the idea of us getting together after our cheating spouses got killed, come on, that's ridiculous. That kind of stuff only happens on the Hallmark Channel. So, I let you walk away without even saying goodbye. A year later, Rachel hands me this book, Ellie continued. It was obvious you were pouring your heart out on those pages, and it was clear it was about the affair between our spouses. When they got their comeuppance, it felt like someone opened the curtains and let the sunlight in. You completely got it. I had been seeing a therapist for almost a year, and he noticed a change in my attitude right away. So I gave him the book to read, and at my next session he said, and I quote here, pardon my French, but this guy's a fucking genius. Well, if I'm some kind of fucking genius, then why am I living in a hole in the wall with more than $10 million in the bank? Ellie looked stunned. I knew you had your settlement money and the big insurance policy, but I didn't realize you were doing that well for yourself. Why are you living like that? Because when you're by yourself and afraid to trust anyone, money doesn't mean a whole lot, I replied. Basically, I'm a simple man with no big vices. I don't have to work, if you want to call my writing work. I don't have anybody to share my life and my money with. Saying it out loud for the first time, I realized just how pathetic I sounded. I was living my life in a fantasy book world where I made Tracy and Derek pay for their cheating ways every 6 months or so. Sure, it was entertaining, but in reality, I wasn't really living, I was merely existing. I sat at the table, staring at nothing, hearing nothing, feeling nothing, until suddenly I felt a surge of electricity from Ellie's lips pressed against mine. Her tongue found its way into my mouth, and I returned her kiss eagerly, like a man in a desert finding a sip of water. We stayed locked in a passionate embrace for what felt like an eternity. When she finally pulled away, she told me to settle the tab and take her back to my apartment. I awoke from the dreamlike state, fully present in the moment. In the 4+ years since Tracy passed away, I had engaged in physical relationships with several women, but making love had been different. I hadn't experienced that since my wife's death. Ellie and I had talked about our respective pasts. She'd been with a few men since Derek, but like me, not many. So, we took it slow, savoring every touch and kiss. Our kisses were deep and meaningful, exploring each other with a tenderness that could rival any romance novel. We caressed each other slowly, feeling every curve and contour with reverence. It was as if we were playing a symphony with our fingertips, each touch deliberate and soulful. When we finally came together intimately, it was a gentle, deliberate act. I ensured she was fully aroused and ready, running my hands over her, feeling her respond eagerly to my touch. As I entered her, I moved slowly, feeling the warmth and tightness of her body enveloping me. Every movement was deliberate, every sensation heightened. I felt her inner muscles tighten around me, intensifying the connection between us. It was a profound experience, almost spiritual, as we moved together in a rhythm that felt like an ancient dance. When she climaxed, it was powerful, and I found myself carried along with her, lost in the moment of shared ecstasy. For a moment afterward, I lay on top of Ellie, my arms trembling slightly from the exertion. Gently, I shifted us onto our sides so we could face each other. She opened her eyes slowly, still catching her breath. Wow, she mouthed silently, her eyes speaking volumes. We lay there in silence, gazing at each other, the intimacy between us palpable. Finally, Ellie broke the silence. I understand everything you've told me, and all I can say is if you let me in and trust me, I will prove worthy of your trust every day for the rest of our lives. If that's a proposal, I accept. No, we didn't rush into marriage after one incredible night together. But that night marked the beginning of our journey together. About a year later, when we both felt ready and sure of our commitment, we tied the knot. We moved into a spacious new home in the countryside, with plans for a family that included 4 children. Our house even had a guest suite for visitors, reflecting our hopes for a warm, welcoming home. With Ellie by my side, I discovered a new dimension to my writing. Our relationship provided fulfillment and closure, and I no longer felt compelled to write revenge stories about Tracy and Derek. Yet, I still penned 1 or 2 each year, not out of personal need, but because they continued to resonate with readers and my publisher's bottom line. The karma train had been kind to me, and I was grateful to share its blessings with others. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Write your opinion in the comments. Remember, you're writing a story too, and it's up to you whether it's a good one or not.